And I think it's already the single hair that has both root and, of course, the strand that gives inspiration to sayings or popular sayings like the single hair in the soup that are also present in the exhibition. And another level of information that Thomas and Miriam have already mentioned in their curatorial statement is the various sources of knowledge that we present through quotes. And they are from literature, politics, science, and pop culture. These quotes are showcased as flags throughout the exhibition space. They link different times and contexts, much like the famous German soccer coach who expressed regret over submitting a hair sample following a drug scandal. The concept of hair as a genetic material and the ethical challenges that come with that are further explored in the exhibition by New York-based artist and biohacker Heather Dewey Hagborg in the video work DNA Spoofing. Produced in collaboration with Aurelia Moser, Alison Birch, and Adam Harway, Heather has kindly agreed to tell us more about the work herself. Welcome, Heather.
Hello, thank you. It's so nice to be here. I'm just going to share my screen and then presentation here. Hopefully that looks good. So the piece that I'm presenting here at the Museum Folkwang DNA Spoofing is part of a trajectory of works examining the physical body as a source of information, examining the vulnerability of that body, and particularly looking at genetic information. And this is part of a trajectory of works that I've made looking into these various kinds of liabilities of the body that begin with Stranger Visions in 2012. And this was a piece in which I collected genetic artifacts that people left in public, like hair, like cigarette butts, like fingernails, chewed up gum, and I extracted DNA from that and created portraits based on that information. And it all started with the hair. So I was sitting in a therapy session one day and I was looking at this print that was across from me. And the glass covering the print was cracked and there was this hair stuck in the crack of the glass. And I sat there for the therapeutic hour just staring at this hair and thinking, instead of thinking about myself, really thinking about who this person was who might have left this hair and what this hair said about them and what I could learn about them if I was to take that hair and analyze it and try to find out as much as possible about them. And so when I left there, it occurred to me that the things that make us human, like the most important things about us, the messiness of our bodies, become a liability as we are constantly facing the possibility of shedding these physical traces in public and leaving artifacts which anyone could come along and mine for information. And so in the project Stranger Visions, that's exactly what I began to do. I started to obsessively collect these hairs and these bits of chewed up gum and these cigarette butts from streets and public bathrooms and waiting rooms and subways in New York City. I extracted DNA from them and I analyzed it to generate 3D life-size full-color portraits representing what those individuals might look like based on genomic research. And to do that, I looked at a variety of different traits, some of which are well established, genetically speaking, like eye color, some of which are more disputed, like ancestry, some which are not often considered controversial, but which I do think demand further analysis and deconstruction, like genetic sex, and more speculative science, so preliminary studies of things like weight and freckling and facial shape that were coming out at the time. And this is the lab that I worked at. This was the first ever community biolab in the world. It's called GenSpace. It was in downtown Brooklyn at the time. And I was able to sign up and take a crash course there, and through that, learn the basics of how to extract DNA, how to amplify it, how to analyze it, and how to proceed with attempting to do this project, which in the beginning I didn't know really where it would lead. I worked with an open source facial model produced by the University of Basel that had this ability to be parameterized or changed along different axes, for example, gender. And to make a long story short, I would take the genetic profile and sync that up with the model, and then I would output some 5 different versions of a face. And from that, I would just intuitively choose my favorite. So it was a totally subjective decision which face I would output to match that genetic data. And I would, maybe it was one that made me think of something, or maybe it made me feel something when I looked at it. And then I would take that software, take that digital model from the software, fix it up a little bit in 3D modeling software, and then send it to a 3D printer where it was printed in full color. And for the purposes of today, it's worth mentioning that the models have no hair. So this is because these facial recognition models, this is based off of a facial recognition model, and very often the hair is excluded from these models. So when they're scanning people's faces, this has maybe been touched on a couple times today already. Very often it's just the cut off around the face, and the hair is excluded. And for my purposes, in a way that worked well, because I was not really sure about printing hair anyway and how that would look. And so I was happy to have the hair not be there. It's sort of an unsolved problem how I would present that. Even though the hair would have been a very rich source of genetic information, because since there's a lot that we can predict about a person, about what their hair looks like from their DNA. So this project was meant to predict this problematic future, to show that there's this new technique coming of forensic DNA phenotyping, where authorities will be attempting to predict things about us from our DNA, where also any other kinds of bodies might do that, or employers or insurances, etc. And to really confront people with it. So to have them be able to walk into an exhibit and look at a face and think, that could be me, that could be my DNA. What does it mean that this person walks around and just picks this stuff up? And on another level, it's also a very strange kind of intimacy, and that was something that I kind of learned later on in the process. It's a very peculiar way of connecting with a stranger, to look at their DNA and know more about them than that they might even know about themselves in some ways. You can analyze things that people might not be aware of, potentially. So DNA spoofing then came from an invitation that followed on this work on Stranger Visions. It's an invitation to something called Art Hack Day, that was a kind of coming together of art and technology, following the idea of the hackathon, which is that you have maybe like 2 days, maybe a weekend, to produce a piece of software. And the idea was to take that idea of the hackathon and apply it to art and technology. So bringing together a bunch of people who would be interested in both of those kinds of things, and then just see what kind of projects people could come up with making in a weekend. And so I'll just play the video in the background silently as I tell you a little bit about the project. Hopefully you can see the video well. So in working on, in being invited to the Art Hack Day, I teamed up with 3 other people who were variously, one was a designer, Adam Harvey, one was an archivist and programmer, Aurelia Moser. You can see Aurelia on the screen here next to me. That's me with longer hair in the old days. And then also with artist and activist Allison Birch. So we met at the Art Hack Day and decided to work on this project together. We started talking about what was on our minds as the most pressing issues, and we were all interested in the topic of surveillance. And so for just a little historical context, this was directly after the Snowden revelations about the scope of government surveillance, It was really just a couple months after the Snowden thing started to come out. And it was also a few years after WikiLeaks had arrived. Chelsea Manning became a whistleblower on the topics of Iraq and Afghanistan. So there was a burgeoning interest in questions of privacy. And we were tapping into this with the project, and each of us were interested in these questions of privacy from a different perspective. So Adam Harvey, for example, you might have seen a project of his called CV Dazzle. He worked on this facial recognition research and developed a project which was meant to share kind of tips and tricks of using makeup and fashion techniques for evading facial recognition technologies. And so kind of bringing together the stuff that Adam was doing, the stuff that I was doing, we started brainstorming. How might one evade genetic surveillance, and what kinds of DIY tips and tricks we might offer? And this is what we came up with, this idea of sharing lipstick, sharing saliva, sharing eyelashes, sharing hair, all of these little bits and pieces. And while it's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek answer to the question of like, how can you evade genetic surveillance, it is also based on real meaningful research. So the number one thing that makes forensic DNA analysis or profiling more difficult is if the DNA is a mixture. So DNA spoofing here is providing these kind of easy ways that you and your friends can help each other out by mixing your DNA together. And no shortage of people have joked that this video is about how to protect yourself from me. There's some truth to that. And just to conclude, so the takeaway today is perhaps if you'd like to evade DNA surveillance, consider borrowing or stealing some hairs from your friends or strangers. Thank you.